This Hemisphere Bridge lecture is associated with the Nurturing Catharsis video entitled Addressing Childhood Trauma with Yoga. First, I'd like to introduce you to polyvagal science. Polyvagal science refers to two branches of the nervous system. One branch, the parasympathetic, is the rest response. The other branch, sympathetic, is the stress response. Your rest response takes care of cellular repair, digesting nutrients, creating new connections in the brain, and many other functions of health within the body. Your stress response, however, turns off all of those processes and floods you with hormones that increase your likelihood of surviving a dire situation. Why this is relevant to our session today is because we are going to process some childhood trauma, which means we are going to engage stress response neural pathways that were developed many years ago and integrate those pathways into newer, less threatened ones, so that feelings of loneliness or inadequacy or being unloved don't shut off the healthy processes of our body. Trauma, in terms of physiology, trauma is any threatening experience that was internalized into the functionality of the nervous system. This includes perceived threats and threats as simple as withdrawal of affection or perceived withdrawal of affection. You do not have to remember a trauma for it to have affected your development. Our bodies are epigenetic, meaning that our bodies adapt to our environment. Trauma is a key factor in how our bodies function because the degree of threat from our environment translates to the degree to which we must be vigilant or hypervigilant in order to survive. Psychology as physical. You may think of psychology as an intangible, as concepts that are removed from the physical body. But I'd like to clarify this. When we experience psychological triggers, our nervous systems shift our biochemistry to be best suited for the current situation. So, for example, when I ask, why didn't my parents protect me? The awareness of the concept of an unprotected child may bring with it a sense of injustice, disappointment, anger, sadness, vulnerability, etc. When this happens, your neurochemistry goes back to a certain pattern of feeling. The brain does this to repeat behaviors that led to survival in past situations, but it may be outdated. So, even though injustice and vulnerability may be conceptual, they have blatant physical effects within your body by altering hormones, neurotransmitters, and what pathways of the brain are being used. In this session, we want to trigger old responses while practicing yoga. So the old pathways fire while we are creating new somatic patterns. This is to engage the body feeling as a vulnerable child while being mindful of the body as an adult. In terms of neuroplasticity, we want our brains to create more effective pathways for navigating our lives. Since we are no longer helpless children at the mercy of adults, we need our brains to feel that we are currently capable, that we have an adult body, and we are now the controllers of our own survival. New neurons that are created within the brain will be more accurate and less panicked in relation to our capability. The pathways that were formed as an infant and as a toddler are approval-based survival strategies. This is because as a toddler, we did not have the agency and autonomy to live without adult caretakers. In order to update the physiology of these strategies, We trigger old patterns while holding the body in new ways. It is vitally important to process trauma in physical ways. Awareness of our trauma engages our stress response, meaning it floods our bodies with the hormones that make us want to move, often to fight or flee. So when we bring awareness to our traumas while exercising or doing yoga, etc., we are following our stressed hormone response to run its course, instead of holding a prolonged stress response. Activity amid a flood of cortisol and adrenaline is a means of nervous system regulation. The average wild animal is back to a regulated nervous system in 90 seconds or less following a life or death trauma. Largely, this is because when anger and fear are pumped into the system, they use it. Humans, however, often repress emotions brought on by stress and sit through it, meaning the hormones linger and the body can't fully feel safe enough to totally engage the rest response. This is nervous system dysregulation. When the nervous system cannot decide whether the environment is safe or threatening, it will switch task, maintenance of vital organs, and preparing for you to burn energy in an emergency at any moment. Meridians, tapping and massage. So I've not done a whole lot of research into acupuncture or acupressure or EFT, also known as the emotional freedom technique, or tapping. But here's my understanding of what meridians are and why they work the way they do. Meridians are a series of interconnected pressure points that electrochemically communicate to each other. They do this to interpret information with the nerves and give that information to the organs. In polyvagal terms, this means that meridians are channels that help the nervous system decide whether it should be in rest response or threat response regarding the current environment. So, how it's been explained to me is at times energy or electrochemical signals, however you want to say it, don't always reach their desired destination. Since these pathways are being used thousands of times per day, over time this leads to a buildup of pressure and mixed messages in terms of what hormonal state the body should be in. When this occurs, these meridians, these pressure points, will be more sensitive. And by tapping or massaging them, you aid the flow of these signals and therefore this system of communication within your own body. Though I can't claim to know with certainty how meridians work, I can attest that I feel better after massaging meridians along my face. Whether it's meridians communicating better or simply easing tension in my face, I can't know. However, it consistently feels good, and I'll introduce it in hopes that it is pleasant for you as well. In this session, when I asked you to sustain a humming out-breath, I did this because the vibrations from humming, oming, singing, etc. stimulate the vagus nerve in a parasympathetic way. This is one way to communicate to your body that it is safe, which means it can rest and heal. Dynorphin. Certain neurotransmitters are popular in understanding human behavior. You may have heard of dopamine, endorphin, oxytocin, serotonin, etc. These are considered good neurotransmitters we want to experience. One neurotransmitter that isn't as popular is dynorphin. This is responsible for feelings of urgent discomfort. This neurotransmitter exists to cause a swift reaction in the face of injury or potential injury. For example, touching boiling water. Your brain creates this feeling of pain and discomfort to get you to remove your hand from the damage into a safer place. But there's a fun interaction here. So in order for this instinct to be effective, it triggers the flushing of all the excess dopamine that's yet to find a receptor within your brain. If it didn't do this, you might be more focused on the pleasure of the cookie that you're eating than you are on how direly you need to remove your hand from the boiling water. This is extremely beneficial because when your brain fails to receive dopamine in its search to find homeostasis, it forms more receptors for dopamine, meaning it recalibrates your sensitivity to pleasure. So when we trigger dynorphin with a cold shower or exercising or holding goddess pose, etc., we are integrating discomfort into aiding the balance of our neurochemistry. EMDR. So during Shavasana, I told you to move your eyes back and forth for the duration of the pose. I did this because of what was found in EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Essentially, it is a talk therapy with vagus nerve stimulation. Many swear by this therapy because it is often the first time some witnessed the flashback of their trauma while having an awareness of their adult body. EMDR uses eye movements to stimulate the vagus nerve during the session. This adds a layer of nervous system regulation to talking through traumatic experience. The reason this is thought to work so effectively is because the only time your eyes dart from one side to the other while your head is still is during REM sleep. And while we sleep, our rest response is, of course, engaged. Another way to say this is, when we move our eyes from one side to the other, we are communicating to our body through past association that we are safe enough for our rest response to be engaged and don't need the overwhelming sense of urgency associated with large amounts of stress hormones. This is why, in this session, I instruct you to keep your head still in Shavasana, but to move your eyes from one side to the other. I also want to mention that having this kind of trauma does not mean your caregivers were bad people or crappy parents. Our nervous systems have very limited information to go on while making its initial interpretations about relating to others and the world at large. As infants and toddlers, what feels true to our bodies becomes how the body wires itself to fit the environment. This is not a matter of logic. Again, our brains form at 700,000 to over 1 million new connections per second in the first 3 years of life. Your body has made thousands upon thousands upon thousands of neural pathways on how it must behave long before you ever had your first logical thought. Feeling as if the love of your parents is conditional, whether that's true or not, will influence the physiology of your entire nervous system as you grow through childhood, not only in neuronal pathways, but in your hormonal balance as well. I'd also like to mention that I may not be the best person for writing Hemisphere Bridge content. I have a strong preference for scientific language over spiritual language. One fear I have regarding this project, I won't be actually bridging the hemispheres, but rather making the emotional brain more palatable to the logical brain, which implies that the quantifiable deserves to be dominant over the intuitive, which is dangerous, i.e. the Industrial Revolution. We are just now, as a species, beginning to understand the intelligence of emotions. And it's humorous that once we can put something into words, it becomes real to us, completely disregarding the fact that emotions were always highly intelligent, long before we even had a word for the concept of science. If I forgot anything in this session, let me know. I'll add an explanation to the description if so. Thank you. And I also want to read off a list of some of the authors and people who I've learned from about all of this. So if you find this content very engaging and interesting and fascinating like I do, here are some authors and researchers that you may absolutely love learning from. Bessel van der Kolk, Stephen Porges, Gabor Mate, Tara Brach, Alice Miller, Robert Sapolsky, Fred Luskin, Peter Levine, Nicole LePera, Aliyah Washington, Sukie Baxter, Benjamin Fry, Johan Hari, Brianna MacWilliam, Rhonda Patrick. Thank you again, and enjoy your day.